Happy Friday. Welcome to another episode of BrainScratch. I'm John Lorden. Thank you so much for spending some time with me here today. Before we start on today's case, a quick note. We are taking next week off. No releases on YouTube or Seriously Mysterious. Next week, we will return on Monday, October 18th with a very special episode of Case Cracked. It's one that I don't think you're going to want to miss. TV production company working on a television show is using a haunted house attraction and figures out that one of their props actually turns out to be real human remains. What's the story? How did they wind up there? We're going to go into all that with Christy Arnhart on Monday, October 18th, and I hope you'll join us for that. Today, we're looking into a case where a family has waited nearly 20 years at this point for justice. The media on this case, somewhat consistent, but a little thin, and it seems like it's trailing off over recent years. I want to try to capture everything that's out there at this time, save it, and hopefully use this to help re-raise exposure, keep people thinking and talking about Russell Turcotte, and maybe the person that has the information that can help his family find justice in this case will do the right thing and use that contact information that we've got in the description box down below. But let's go ahead and start with this story. And, looking into a case this old, a lot of you might remember blogs over at Angel Fire. It looks like this is actually a repost of an article that was written on this case back in November of 2002. And that is several months after Russell had gone missing. And unfortunately, there's a terrible discovery. Trent Haberstroh from Hansborough, North Dakota, said he was transporting cattle to Devil's Lake. The tailgate was open and 2 cows fell out about 8 miles northwest of Devil's Lake. Attempts to round up the cows by Haberstroh and several friends were unsuccessful, so the group decided to call it a night and come back in the morning and try it again. Early Tuesday morning, Haberstroh was out looking for his cattle again with 2 friends and his wife. Haberstroh said he found 1 cow, tied it up to a tree, and walked through the trees to get back to his pickup. On the way to the truck, he stepped over what he thought initially were branches and then realized that they were human remains. They were essentially the legs of Russell. According to the article here, he found a nearly nude body lying amongst the trees at about 10 a.m. And I've heard some other descriptions quoted directly from law enforcement that Russell's body was completely nude. The body was 2 feet into the shelter belt and partially decomposed. The Ramsey County Sheriff's Department contacted the Grand Forks County Sheriff's Department, and Russell's mother, Linda, her last name was Flynn at that time, she would get remarried, of Wolf Point, Montana, was notified of her son's death. "I knew he didn't just run away," she cried. "I kept telling everybody that. It hurt so bad." She and other family members and friends came to Grand Forks last month with a Texas search team. Yes, Texas EquiSearch Assist. They searched, from what I understand, about a 30-mile area from where he was last seen. Unfortunately, his remains would be found more in the 60 to 70. Some places are saying up to 100 miles away, but it looks more like 70 based on the maps I'm running. She was there with Texas EquiSearch. They spent about 4 days looking for Russell in the area. On to page 2 of this article. Russell's father, Bill Turcotte, quit his carpentry job and searched U.S. Highway 2 and Interstate 94 between Grand Forks and Wolf Point in July. Russell wouldn't hurt anybody, Bill said. "I can't understand why anybody would hurt him." Let's learn a little bit more about Russell, unfortunately, with a brief explanation at Find a Grave. Russell was considered a free spirit Native American of the Turtle Mountain tribe in Montana. He was hitchhiking home from a rainbow gathering he'd attended in Michigan, where he disappeared near Devil's Lake, North Dakota. Bit of a free spirit, obviously, and it seems like he was into the hippie community. And part of that aspect, I think, relying on other people for rides, becoming trusting of that kind of community, did that really spill over into a risk factor for him when he was kind of outside of that community? Did he maybe take a ride from someone that he shouldn't have? It seems like that might be the case, but let's get into the details and you guys can come to your own conclusions as well. Over at xlcountry.com, Russell Turcotte was a fun-loving 19-year-old who, like many, loved music, especially rock and roll, and dancing throughout the house with his mother to it. Turcotte is remembered for his smile, his warm, kind soul, and his faith in people. Somehow, he had made it 100 miles west from a gas station where he was last seen, and they actually had surveillance footage. I haven't seen anything released, not even a still shot from that surveillance footage. But he was found about 100 miles west, right off of Highway 2, almost 4 months later by a rancher. After an investigation, Turcotte's death is ruled a homicide by blunt force trauma to the back of his head. It's also noted here that there was a bag of evidence gathered. I'm seeing some other comments where it seems like someone in law enforcement said that they had gathered some things from the location. Interestingly, in other retellings of this story, I'm seeing that there was nothing else to be gathered. They're saying that it was literally just his body that was out there, and that was that. So I'm not sure exactly which way to go with that, but that's why I tell you guys about the differences in the story here too. Another page from back in the day. It's really interesting. Just takes me back to the mid-90s seeing these web pages formatted this way. And a bit of a picture here that I want to point out. This is the last known photograph of Russell. And even in this article, it kind of notes that, he's looking kind of gaunt, essentially, in this. And I don't know how long he had been on this trip to this rainbow gathering or what the conditions were around that. But certainly, it certainly looks like he's maybe not eating enough. I don't know, something along those lines in this picture. But you can see also, looks like a lot of people would look if they were at a Grateful Dead or a Dead and Company show, something along those lines. Russell Turcotte had recently completed firefighter training, but was enjoying a vagabond lifestyle. He was last seen at a gas station in the vicinity of the 4300 block of Gateway Drive near Highway 2 in Grand Forks, North Dakota. He was on his way home from a week-long hippie gathering in Brainerd, Michigan. So one question answered, how long he was gone. Looks like it was only a week. And let's go ahead and take a look at the map here now. The Simonson Station store is, I believe, where the footage is from. But there's also a truck park in this area that he might have gone to as well. But this is the approximate area where he was last seen. And then this blue line that shoots out directly west, pretty much straight shot on Highway 2 there, all the way out to this Devil's Lake area. This is where he was located. Russ Turcotte was apparently abducted, abused in a remote area, and may have been bludgeoned to death. Russ, as seen in his last photo, was exhausted and gaunt and vulnerable the summer of 2002. The Ramsey County coroner said Turcotte's body may have been at the spot since late July or early August. So it sounds like, by the coroner's estimation, that pretty much at the time he goes missing, this happens very close to that time. It's not like he was taken somewhere else and maybe held for a period of time and then dropped off at that location. The timing of this seems like this is all one event. And just to give you guys a little more backstory, essentially, his mother, he's contacted his mother. He's supposed to get home. It's his best friend's wedding. He's the best man. And he needs some financial help. He needs some money wired to him because instead of hitchhiking all the way home, he's going to try to get a bus. Now, I don't know how that whole wiring feature works. I don't know if, because essentially his mother says, okay, I'll wire you the money tomorrow morning from when he calls. So I don't know if that means that he would have to stay in that particular area, or if you wire transfer to Western Union, is it that you don't have to specify an address? I've never sent money this way, so I don't know for sure. If you guys know, tell me about it in the comments down below. I'm just wondering if there was a mechanism by which his mother could have still sent that money. He wouldn't have had to stay at that particular location to receive it, but maybe could have gone to another Western Union somewhere else, closer to his home, recovered the money from there, and then maybe bought, a bus ticket wherever he was. Because it's strange to me to think about the possibility that, he's contacted his mom. Essentially, he's got the funds for the bus trip coming the next day. Seems like for some reason he gets in someone's car. I mean, we have his body that's found, almost 100 miles away. So just interesting factors in this, and it's kind of hard to make sense out of all of it. I did see some comments from his father on a television show, and he was saying that, they knew Russell was known to hitchhike. His father kind of told him, I really wish he wouldn't do that. I think it's dangerous. But as we're seeing noted here in several places, Russell, an extremely trusting person, really trusting the good of humanity, and it looks like that might have been taken advantage of in this particular case. All right, we have an article here. Once again, I think these are reprints of articles that are being held up on these older web pages, and I'm thankful because it seems like the original news sources have disappeared. This looks like it was originally posted in a paper called The Herald. When Russell's family mounted their own search using a Texas outfit, once again, we know that that's Texas EquiSearch, and pleading with Grand Forks police, the police finally became involved in October last year, 3 months after Russell had disappeared. So we have a significant time gap in terms of the family knows something's wrong. He's supposed to be there for his friend's wedding. He doesn't show up. They're trying to get help. It seems like law enforcement isn't being particularly helpful until they're out there with Texas EquiSearch doing a 30-mile search from where he was last seen, and then law enforcement starts kind of getting on the ball, it seems like. But the search involved only a few law enforcement officers and a couple dozen volunteer searchers, instead of the dozens of news reporters from national and regional companies and regular coverage on national TV shows. Russell's case attracted only fleeting news media attention. His mother, Flynn, said when she first called police on July 14th, a dispatcher, when hearing how old Russell was, chuckled and told her, just wait a few more days. She then was told to file a missing persons report through her local police agency in Wolf Point. That meant that Grand Forks police did not have primary jurisdiction, which didn't help, she said. Russell Turcotte's vagabond lifestyle, being often on the road, hitchhiking, made it more difficult for law enforcement and the public to be certain that he was actually missing or possibly harmed and not just off traveling. They acted like he was a little hippie kid who wandered off. And we told them that isn't the case, Turcotte, his father, said. His father also asks, what is different about Russell's disappearance and subsequent murder, other than our son is obviously Native American and we are also? Now you have a blonde-haired, blue-eyed white girl. Where's the justice? Where's the equality? It doesn't seem to be there. Now, several of you are probably thinking, is he referencing the Gabby Petito case? No, this case is from 20 years ago. There was another case at that time that was big in the area, getting that same level of coverage. And even back then, 20 years ago, we were talking about the same discrepancies that we're talking about here today still. So for anyone that's just becoming aware of that stuff, I did release a video on this last week. You can go ahead and find that on the channel. Just trying to talk about this, trying to keep this conversation going, because this case is a perfect example. 20 years ago, we were running into the same issue as we're running into now. We're not making much movement in terms of being better about media coverage on Indigenous cases like this one and cases that involve other ethnicities as well. For Russell's family, the waiting is to find who killed him and left him in a lonely North Dakota tree row. I'm going to always try to be optimistic about finding who killed him, said his mother. We will do all that we can to make sure that happens somewhere in some fashion. We just won't give up. It's been a fight from the beginning because he was worth it. He was our son. Over at the Bismarck Tribune, just something I was kind of interested in, and I found this article that actually references Russell's case as well. There were 5 murders in 2002 in the state of North Dakota. I'm just kind of curious about what's going on with the resources here. You know, we're hearing that it's taken them months to get help on this as a missing persons investigation. Are they just so, overloaded? And then what happens once this turns into a homicide investigation? Well, for that year, there's only 5 murders. North Dakota had 5 murders in 2002, matching the lowest number reported in any year for the last quarter of a century. On top of that, you can read through this article. Basically, everything gets solved except one. The 5th murder has not been solved, Russell Turcotte's murder. And I'm not trying to say that, we have to remember that these conditions can be very different. Some of the cases that they're talking about seem like they're pretty straightforward. This case is tough. We've got him hanging out, first of all, at a gas station, then around a truck stop. You've got people that could be traveling long distances that are coming through there. So right off the bat, you have the potential of, is this someone that's local, or is this someone that travels through the area, could still know a little bit about it? Or is this someone that traveled through the area that one time, took advantage of a situation? His family, based on comments I'm seeing from his mother in particular, seems to think that it's probably going to be a local because of where he's found. They just think that it's got to be someone that knows this area. But back to the point, if it's a trucker and this is a regular route that they take, could they potentially know about an area right off of Highway 2 that they drive frequently? I think it's possible as well. There's a lot, and obviously we're dealing with limited information in terms of what law enforcement even has. This bag of evidence, what is that? What's in there? The family isn't even aware, at least from the comments I'm seeing in articles fairly recent, they're not even aware if DNA is a factor in this case. Were there any samples that were found with Russell? Maybe in that bag of evidence, if there was some item that was left behind. It's a challenging, it's a tough case, admittedly, but it's one of 5 cases. Every other case got solved. It makes you wonder a little bit. Another article at Bismarck Tribune, this one from 2003. So the years, unfortunately, starting to tick by. Clad in bright green t-shirts that read, "Justice for Russ," the family of murder victim Russell Turcotte came to the place where their son was last seen alive, hoping to spark a lead in the investigation of his death. "Somebody in this area knows what happened to him. I firmly believe that," said his mother, Linda. Russell's father, Bill, said, "I hope I don't have to go to my grave not knowing." Earlier in the day, the family visited the spot where Russell's body was found. His brothers, Jacob and Michael, said it was a difficult time, but they hope that something good comes from their visit. "He was happy-go-lucky, someone who everyone loved," Michael said. His other brother, Jacob, said, "He just loved being a hippie." Darby Parsons met Turcotte in Fargo a couple days before he was last seen alive. She gave him a ride to an Interstate 29 ramp where he had planned to hitchhike north. She said, "I've been in contact with the family ever since I found out he was missing." Now, another article I found actually says, I believe Darby met up with him at the Rainbow Gathering, I believe. And then they spent a little bit of time together, and then she gave him a ride to this area. Obviously, they spent a couple days in Fargo as well. "The general public has been real helpful, real interested, sympathetic," said his father. "I can't say the same for law enforcement." Now, we have some comments from Jeff White with the Bureau of Criminal Investigation. "We understand this is an emotional issue for the family because they've lost a loved one, and that's a horrible thing to have happen to anyone. Our agents can't afford to get caught up in it." And let me just be clear, he's talking about the emotions of it, because I know you could take that sentence another way and say, what the heck's this guy saying? "We have to look at these things objectively and a little coldly in order that we don't miss anything." So he's really talking about just the eyes of an investigator and not letting the emotions kind of tilt your view of the investigation. "It was a cold trail when we got it," he said, "but we don't quit." Also just wanted to point out, the family did mention that some people in the area, because they're traveling to this other area trying to raise exposure, some people are buying them meals, but there's also a company that kind of stands up to help them. The Newman Signs Company donated a billboard in Grand Forks with Russell Turcotte's photo and information about the case on it. It was put up a few blocks from the service station where he was last seen. I really appreciate when companies step up like that and help these families in these terrible situations. Over at spokesman.com, we hear of a little bit of an interesting twist. there's a potential person of interest that comes up in the case, but not because of information that directly ties him to it. It's just kind of, profiling in a way. We've got a guy in the area. He's getting busted for other charges. Could he actually be related to this case as well? The family of a Montana man who was found dead near Devil's Lake 3 years ago is asking the FBI to investigate whether convicted sex offender Joseph Edward Duncan III might be a suspect. Duncan, 42 years old at this time, who was living in Fargo. We just heard, we know Russell was definitely in Fargo for a period of time. He was living in Fargo when Russell disappeared, has been charged with killing 3 members of an Idaho family so that he could do terrible things to the children in the family. Duncan has pleaded not guilty in the killings. Prosecutors are seeking the death penalty. Ultimately, they would get it for those charges, but he would sit on death row. We'll hear more about him when we get to it. Bill, Russell's father, said that his son had been in Fargo the day before he disappeared. He also said that Russell Turcotte appeared younger than his actual age. Russell did have a real boyish appearance about him, his father said. He was a young man, but if you take a look at the last picture of him, he did appear to be a little boy. So I think there's some reasoning for looking at Duncan as a potential person of interest in this case and asking the FBI to take a look at it. Roll forward to about a year later, the FBI says convicted killer and sex offender Joseph Duncan is a possible suspect in the unsolved murder of Russell. FBI spokesman Donald Robinson says Duncan is being looked at in the 2002 killing. Federal investigators won't comment on leads, but Russell's father, Bill, says the FBI told him there's evidence placing Duncan at the same Grand Forks truck stop within hours of the time that Russell was last seen. So, kind of 2 compelling points. Russell being in Fargo, you've got some potential connectivity around that, but we know his new friend Darby is the one that winds up driving him to this area where he's dropped off. It's not like Duncan is the guy that drove him to this area and then he goes missing from there. But now we have a comment coming from Bill. It's coming from Russell's father, but he's saying the FBI is telling him that Duncan actually, they had information that he was at the same truck stop within hours. So a little more information on Joseph Edward Duncan over at his Wikipedia page. He was an American convicted serial killer and child molester. He was charged with the 2005 kidnappings and murders of members of the Grown family. That's the family that was mentioned in the previous article. He was serving 11 consecutive sentences of life without parole in conjunction with the same crimes, as well as the 1997 murder of Anthony Martinez of Beaumont, California. Additionally, Duncan confessed to, but had not been charged with, the 1996 murder of 2 girls, Samiejo White and Carmen Cubayas in Seattle. At the time of the attack on the Grown family, Duncan was on the run from a child molestation charge in Minnesota. I mean, just looking at the years here, this guy seems like he was extremely active, and, slotting Russell's case in there, is it a possibility? I certainly think so. In 1980, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison for sexually assaulting a boy in Tacoma, and as a result had spent all but 8 years of his adult life in prison. Now, as I mentioned, he was charged for those murders, did wind up on death row, sat there until March of 2021, when it was found that he was suffering from a terminal brain tumor. Brain cancer essentially gets him. He decides that he's going to decline treatment for chemotherapy or radiation therapy, and he dies March 28th, 2021 at the age of 58. I don't think we get any type of deathbed confession or anything like that, because none of that has come out since. Is it possible that someone else, maybe that he was a fellow inmate or something, might have some information on Russell's case that could come out later that ties Duncan to it? I think there might be a possibility, but there's also reasons on the other side to kind of think about the possibility that he's not actually involved with this. Now, once again, this is one of those kind of older looking websites, and this is an analysis done by someone named Hunter Gray. Now, it seems that Hunter Gray is actually maybe leaning away from Duncan as a suspect. From what we've heard about Duncan, the Turcotte situation doesn't quite fit his, quote, thing. I think he's trying to raise the same point that Russell's father was raising in terms of Russell looking younger. I think Gray's trying to point out that, yeah, but he's not a child, and Duncan seems to really be targeting children, but not in every case. And even Gray notes here, anything is probably and sadly possible. Russell was killed in mid-July 2002 at a point when Duncan was living at Fargo, so an obvious question is, where was Duncan then? A basic problem that I have with Duncan as the Turcotte killer involves distance. I've always felt that Russell could have been killed just off of Highway 2, the road to Montana, not far west of Grand Forks Air Force Base, and his body then taken much further to the west of Devil's Lake and dumped where it was eventually found by a rancher. That would separate any signs at the place of the murder from the body itself. It's a good question, and nothing in the media that I've seen can really answer that. Do we think that the location where his body was found was actually the same location where the assault happened? And it's curious that we don't know that. Even I've read a few different descriptions by the rancher that found the remains. There's nothing that's coming through in his descriptions about seeing anything that looked like violence, blood staining of any kind or other items around. So is that really just a dump location, essentially, and the actual crime scene is somewhere else, is another big question in this case. But back to his point, he's making a good point here. So west of the base on Highway 2, things get very dark and lonely and remain so. It would be a long drive from Fargo north to the Forks, which is about 85 miles, then over 100 miles west to the point where Russell was finally found. That would also carry Duncan far out of his way for his trip back to Fargo. So it would put hours on him in a car. Is that a possibility? I still think it's a possibility. I don't think it completely rules it out, but it does raise an interesting point. But this point, maybe even a little better. Although Duncan is clearly worth a good hard look at in this situation, I'm inclined to feel that Russell was the victim of a sexual predator or predators passing through North Dakota on the way to, say, possibly the Seattle, Tacoma, or perhaps Portland area. He was a sharp kid, and I think that it was unlikely he would get into a car late at night that had a North Dakota license plate. This is such an interesting thought. I'm assuming that that's what Duncan had, since Russell, wanted a ride that would give him a straight shot through to his home at Wolf Point in eastern Montana by dawn. So effectively, if you're hitchhiking, I don't know the mentality. I don't. If you guys have tried this, please share it in the comments down below. If someone says, "Hey, I'm heading out in this direction," do you give consideration to their license plate? Do you take a look at it and say, "Well, they're telling me that we're going to Portland, but we're standing in North Dakota, their plate's from North Dakota." I mean, it's still reasonable that someone could be taking a trip out there, but is it a warning indicator at all that this could have been a local saying that they were going to go to another state? I don't know, just some interesting considerations I wanted to share with you guys. But ultimately, we would see a number of years later, this is an article from 2014, the Ramsey County Sheriff says authorities are still trying to solve the slaying of Russell. Sheriff Steve Nelson tells KZZY Radio that authorities review the case file about twice a year, but he says to this point, they haven't come up with anything new. He says a possible suspect was identified a few years ago. I think we know who they're talking about. I think they're talking about Duncan, but later eliminated based on interviews and evidence. If that is Duncan that we're talking about, it sounds like they have ruled him out. And outside of that range of articles from when Russell's family was bringing it up as a point and the FBI kind of had that little response, this part of the conversation just seems to completely end. So I would also have to think that if there was something to that, with Russell passing away earlier this year, that there would have been something that came out from the family just commenting on it. And I've seen some articles where they've been speaking to the press. There's been one or two in the past few years, but I'm not seeing them address that at all. So I have this feeling that the Duncan angle just got completely removed from consideration on this case. Over at DuluthNewsTribune.com, nearly 2 decades later, murder of Montana man who went missing in Grand Forks remains unsolved. Russell Turcotte loved music. He loved dancing around the house with his mother, Linda. He listened to old rock and roll or the Grateful Dead, maybe even some Bonnie Raitt. That's how his mother likes to remember him, with a smile on his face and giving her a kiss on the cheek before his second day, not his first day of junior high school. They'll explain that later. Russell was a very kind soul, his mother said. Speaking recently with a Grand Forks Herald reporter, he believed in kindness and he believed in people. He was a very trusting person, and he was always shocked at times simply when he could find out that people could not be that nice. He wanted to go out into the world and meet new people. He looked to make new friends, his mom said. His death was ruled a homicide, and 2 decades later, still remains unsolved. The case is now listed among the cold cases on the North Dakota Attorney General's website, and tracking new information about it isn't easy. Ramsey County Sheriff Steve Nelson said his department still takes a fresh look at the case whenever they have time, but nothing new has popped up recently. The department has reviewed the case a couple of times in the last 3 years, he said. One time included interviewing those associated with the case again. So we can see even the case reviews are happening less frequently, according to Sheriff Nelson himself. In the previous article, he was like, we look at it a couple times a year. Now he's saying, we've looked at it a couple times in the past 3 years. We're hoping somebody who knows something will come forward. And of course, we have all the contact information in the description box below. If you have the piece on this case, please pick up the phone. Please put it in play. Help this family find the truth that they've been looking for so long. She believes her son's decision to hitchhike probably put him in danger. He paid for that with his life. We all understand that, she said. But what was difficult about it for me was that stigma that he wasn't a nice person because of what he was doing. That doesn't make him a bad person. His mom tries not to dwell on it. She can't change what happened, nor can she change the response in the days after her son's disappearance. But not knowing what could have been is difficult, she said. Her biggest fear is that the person who hurt her son is still out there. Maybe that person has hurt others too. She hasn't learned any new information about the case in years, she said. Her last contact was with the Bureau of Criminal Investigation, an agent there named Mark McNamee, and he died several years ago. I think he died back in 2008. So it's really been a while since she's had a regular point of contact, it seems like. How does she choose to remember her son? She recalls how he declined to kiss her goodbye on his first day of junior high. But on the second day, he leaned across the seat and kissed her cheek. That's what she prefers to remember, that and his love of music, including the time he spent learning about being a DJ at the college radio station. He believed in people. He believed in the world, she said. He was a good kid. He was well loved, very loved. She also notes at another article over at grandforksherald.com, there are many more little Russells. He has many people named after him. I have a grandson named after him and a couple of friends named their sons after him, so he lives on in different ways. She also notes that that date of November 5th, when his remains were found, she needed to do something to change the meaning of that day for her. My wedding anniversary is tomorrow, she said, of her marriage on November 5th in 2004. I had to replace that milestone of Russell's body being found with something happy. She has said that she's learned to live without Russell by focusing on the rest of her family, but she still looks for justice for him. He was a good person. I know it would hurt him to no end to know that the person who hurt him went out and hurt someone else. I just pray that sooner or later this person is brought forward, and I just pray this person has not hurt someone else. And at this point, that's it for the media that's out there. There is this page over at the Attorney General's office for North Dakota about their cold cases. Almost at the bottom of the list, Russell Turcotte, a very brief description of the case, contact information, little more than that, not even a photo. So this is where I'm asking for your guys' help. We need to keep awareness to this case raised. If you have friends in North Dakota, please share this video with them. Let's get more eyes and ears open out there looking for the truth, trying to help this family. Who doesn't deserve it after nearly 2 decades of dealing with this grief? I need your help, and I hope you guys will join me in doing that. I also hope there's some lessons that we can all learn in this. If you've got someone close to you that is hitchhiking, maybe it's time to have a little talk with them. Maybe send them a link to this video as well. Just, it's one of those things. Times have changed. Like I mentioned at the start of the video, I think being part of a community where you could kind of do that within somewhat safe confines of this community, but then stepping outside of that realm and still expecting to be able to do that might have been a little bit of a risk factor as well. We just need to do everything we can to take care of each other and keep those people close to us as safe as possible. So I hope that you will think twice if you're doing this yourself, or if you've got someone close to you, have some important conversations with them. You don't want to wind up like Russell's parents dealing with that aspect as well. And Bill, even knowing that he spoke to his son about this stuff. But, you know, Russell was an adult and capable of making his own decisions. So there's obviously more than one side to that conversation. Before we end today's video, I have to thank several people that are helping to keep things running here at Lord and Arts. A big thank you to new patrons, Shonda, Aaron Hoffner, Stacy Forbes, and Sinead McGlynn. Thank you so much for joining on Patreon. If you'd like to support the channel, please visit lordandarts.com, where you can sign up for Patreon, sign up for PayPal, buy merchandise, or even buy us a coffee like Stacy Masita recently did. We need your help to be able to keep doing these videos here. Obviously, we don't run a ton of advertising in these videos. We run one ad at the beginning. If you stick all the way to the end, you might see another one then. That's it. We want you guys to be able to focus on the cases. And in order to do that, we really need to have people supporting us. So a big thank you to everyone on Patreon, everyone that's contributing through PayPal, everyone that's contributing through Coffee. I really, really appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. You guys are a major piece of what keeps us going here, if you know that or not. And we really, really appreciate you. Once again, no shows next week, returning on October 18th with a very special case cracked. I hope you guys will join us for that. Take care, have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you back here very soon on the Lord and Arts channel.